In no particular order, can both of you just please introduce yourselves and include your name, affiliation, and what your role was on Léamh?
Hi, I'm Tom Lee. I'm a design technologist at Greenhouse Studios, and my role in the project was leading the web development.
My name's Christina Cleary, and I'm an O'Donovan Scholar in the School of Celtic Studies at the Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies. My role on the project was to create the content for the primer and the quiz. So I did this in collaboration with Deirdre Nacarhig, Emma Tabara, and Brendan King.
We'll jump in. Thank you guys so much for making the time to chat with me about the Léamh Paleography. Very exciting project that I know we were all looking forward to seeing. Christina, can you just start with telling us what is early modern Irish and why is it important?
Okay, so ironically, Brooke, early modern Irish isn't my subject at all. My area is actually Old and Middle Irish, and I focus on literature and the language from around the 8th to the 12th century. Early modern Irish is the period of the language from the 13th to around the middle of the 17th century. So it's the period between Middle Irish and Modern Irish. But it's still a period that's of great relevance to me because there's so much Old and Middle Irish material contained in manuscripts that were produced in the early modern Irish period. Yeah. So for example, I'm working on a Middle Irish text that survives in a 16th century manuscript. So my scribe he's an early modern Irish scribe. So I need to know how he spoke, what the language in his period looked like in order to look out for modernizations in my Middle Irish text. Yeah, so that's why it's important for a scholar of early Irish like me, but there are plenty of other reasons why it's important. So you're going to have to stop me at some point because I keep talking.
Well, I think that's a good point to ask what a paleography even is, and why your team decided to create a paleography primer and game for early modern Irish.
Sure. So paleography is the study of writing in handwritten, obviously, historical documents. So it includes studying the script, as in the insular minuscule that you'll see in the primer, the forms of the letters, and the abbreviations that scribes used. So the abbreviations are a little bit reminiscent of text language that people used to use when mobile phones first came out. You know, I might be showing my age a bit now, but in the old SMSs, you used to have a character limit. So you had to do things like you'd use the number 2 for words that sound like the number 2. So the preposition to and the adverb to. Things like LOL and BRB are very obvious to us now, but maybe in 1,000 years' time, it won't be obvious to somebody reading our old texts. I don't know if anybody's going to be reading our old texts, but you know what I mean. So the Irish scribe used abbreviations similarly, and we need to learn what they represent in order to be able to edit a text accurately and to be able to translate it.
Now I feel old because I do remember the character limits and all of those abbreviations. And Tom, did you know anything about early modern Irish or paleography before starting work on Léamh?
So the short answer is no. I think I had a vague awareness of there being an Irish language. I didn't know much about how it sounded or looked written out. But yeah, I would say pretty much no awareness, and certainly no awareness of older forms of Irish either.
So what was it like being the only one on the project team who wasn't a specialist in this area, whether that be Irish language or Irish history?
Well, I think it was really interesting, a really interesting experience because, well, I just like being party to conversations that between experts and sort of trying to puzzle out what they're talking about. I found it to be, a very welcoming group. We have a great team, and if I ever had any questions about how stuff works, they were very eager to explain how those things worked. So yeah, it was a great experience for me.
Cool. I know I love those interdisciplinary teams too. And as a designer or developer, it can definitely be hard to latch onto a project when you don't know about the content. So when you have that kind of team that can really kind of break it down for you and help you understand it, that really makes a world of difference. Christina, can you tell us a little bit about the primary audience? Who specifically do you hope will take advantage of the Léamh Paleography?
So that's a good question. So I put the primer together with the intention that it be used by the specialist and the non-specialist alike. I got that part of the ethos of the Léamh project, as I've understood it anyway, Brendan might come back to me and say otherwise, is to democratize knowledge of early modern Irish and to give people the tools to learn it for themselves without overcomplicating things. So I tried to use simple terminology in order not to alienate the user and to make the content as accessible as possible. So what I want the user to know is that there's nothing impossible about learning paleography. It's just another skill set and a very necessary one if you want to read primary sources. So to answer more succinctly, the primary audience for me includes an array of people. So not so primary, the student of any period of the Irish language, especially the student of early modern Irish, the historian, and the paleography specialist, maybe from an adjacent field. I'd also like to think that someone perhaps without formal training who is very well read on the subject would find this useful also. So I really wanted it to be super accessible.
Great, yeah, and Tom, to kind of put that in context with what you talked about previously, which was not really knowing, the content area when you started. Can you tell me a little bit about how you got to know that user and those user needs, or many user needs, during that design process, and any considerations that you made with them in mind?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the things that we decided to do, early on in the project was to allow for a lot of customization and a lot of entry at various points, keeping in mind that, this would most likely end up being used in classrooms that work at different levels. So we didn't want to have the experience be completely linear, so that people can sort of come in at different points depending on their level.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. And can you talk about, I know there are other language learning projects out there, and can you talk about any inspiration you might have gleaned from those, maybe what you learned from those platforms?
Yeah, well, I think maybe the most interesting thing that has gone on in the sort of larger project that maybe isn't related to this paleography thing is a sort of progression system that we developed. This is sort of for the larger work of the project, but that was based on something I had discovered through a language learning app that I was using personally, and it has a really sort of interesting thing called a spaced repetition system, where you receive questions, you answer them correctly, and then when you answer them correctly, the time between when you're going to be asked those questions again expands, and that happens several times to the point where you've sort of developed longer term retention of these, vocabulary, or whatever it happens to be.
I have to know, Christina, do you use any language learning apps yourself?
I don't. I have used Duolingo in the past when I was trying to learn Spanish for going on holidays. But I'm more of I'm a book kind of person. So I normally go for a teach yourself book instead of an app. Yeah. Again, that might be an age thing, Brooke.
Yeah, I tried to learn Irish for about 2 minutes, and then I switched to Italian, and now we're going strong. So we'll see. Maybe I'll make my way through early modern Irish very soon, now that it's available. So just a question for both of you, and we can start with you, Christina. What are some of the challenges involved with a project like this?
Okay, so the greatest challenge for me was using the backend software, because I'm so technologically illiterate. But luckily I had Tom for help at every hand's turn, and he's laughing now and he knows what I'm talking about. So and then discussing design matters was always tricky for me too, because I don't have the jargon that you need to express what I wanted. But again, Tom was extremely helpful and understanding with that. When it came to creating the primer, there were loads of challenges with regard to content. So the first was deciding what to include and what level of detail was required. So like an online resource is very different to a print publication because it's quick information, yeah. And I didn't want to get into footnotes or add commentary or anything like that that might overwhelm the user, and that in itself was a bit of a challenge, right? So there's like a field related challenge, because there's still a lot more research that has to be carried out in this area. So I had to be really careful about making generalizations about features in Irish paleography. You know, so there are some things that change over time in Irish paleography, but we've left that to one side for the most part because they just require further study. So one funny challenge at the beginning was that we'd selected a manuscript to use as a source of examples that was completely lacking in good examples. So we used it for the quiz in the end, but we had to search for material for the primer elsewhere. We've taken examples from all over the place.
So Tom, I mean, what about you? Any challenges on your end? I imagine they might complement or be the flip side of some of Christina's.
I mean, well, actually, I think when I'm thinking about my whole time on this project, I realizing that like I really have learned a lot about developing apps by working on this project. I would say I was pretty much just figuring the whole thing out when I started, and it kind of felt like we were just cobbling pieces together, you know, finding different technologies to combine, and sort of having day-to-day worries about if we'd be able to use free tier service on various things. But it was really satisfying to see it come together gradually. I guess another challenge is just, you know, an enjoyable challenge is just figuring out what the needs of the project are and how they translate into, you know, specifications for the app, and making the tasks and figuring out what's appropriate for our student assistants to work on versus myself, or what can be configured by content editor, and also making that experience of content editing as simple as it can be and as enjoyable as it can be.
Well, you already alluded a little bit to some of the satisfying aspects of this project, but is there anything that maybe was more particularly satisfying than anything else?
Well, for me, the cool thing about this project is working directly with people who are so excited about its potential to have a real impact in the field. Yeah, I think every time we talk, we have a brief conversation about how awesome this is going to be when it comes out, and so that's just really lights my fire. It really is encouraging.
How about you, Christina?
Well, I loved putting the primer together. I've always wanted to write a primer of Irish paleography, and but I never had the confidence to do it. And this project gave me the confidence to work actually on a print edition that'll go into a bit more detail. So that was really good, really satisfying work. And it was just great to be in a collaboration like this and to be part of the exchange of ideas. Like it's really satisfying when you reach an agreement with Tom on the design end of things. I'll give you that.
Yeah, that could for sure be a challenge on these projects. So it's definitely satisfying when it comes together the way you hope it will.
Exactly, yeah.
And one last question for you, Christina. So we were able to launch this right on St. Patrick's Day. Can you talk a little bit about, or a lot of it, depending on how much you want to say, can you talk about what this project means for Irish culture and Irish heritage?
So St. Patrick's Day marked the end of Seachtain na Gaeilge, which is Irish Week in Ireland. And this is the national campaign to promote the use of the Irish language. So I think it was apt that we launched the project, and this project that teaches you how to read Irish language manuscripts, albeit belonging to a different period of the language. The project, I think, will allow users to feel free to discover Ireland's literary heritage for themselves. I think it points the spotlight on the rich history of book culture in Ireland. So Irish was the first vernacular to be used as a literary language in Europe, and our manuscript culture continued well beyond the invention of the printing press. We have manuscripts being produced into the 19th century, so it's really remarkable, and it's a very long history as manuscript production goes. So I hope this paleography primer will highlight how accessible these manuscripts are as well. A huge number of them have been digitized by the Irish Script on Screen project, hosted here under this roof by the Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies. Anybody can go in, open a manuscript and view it for themselves, and it's absolutely free of charge. So I hope that we've built on this brilliant resource, or that this can be complementary to this resource by providing the basic tools needed to read the contents of a manuscript. So I think it will have a big impact. I think it had a big impact.
That's great. And I'm looking forward to keeping tabs on that and seeing how it's received. And anyone can access this on léamh.org. And there's bios about everybody on there too. And there's a whole lot more information on léamh.org than just the paleography. So I think I would encourage anyone to go check that out if you have any interest in Irish culture and Irish language, and specifically early modern Irish. Thank you both so much for taking the time to chat today, and keep making great work.
Thanks, Brooke.